Well, Rania, we want to turn our attention here now to a case. Well, it actually involves another political prisoner, and in the context here of Ecuador and of Latin America. And many people, I'm sure, have seen the Ecuadorians storming into the Mexican embassy to arrest Jorge Glas, former leader there in Ecuador. To talk about all of this, and there's a lot to it, we are very honored to be joined here once again by Andrés Arauz, who's a former presidential candidate in Ecuador and also a research fellow at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Andres, as always, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thank you, Eugene. Hi, Aranya. Good being with you. And unfortunate times, but important to get the message out.
No, absolutely. And, I think, a lot of people, I'm sure, have probably seen some headlines, that Ecuador stormed into the Mexican embassy, that they took out Jorge Glas and arrested him. And I kind of wanted to start there because I personally have felt that this is one aspect of the coverage that's been very poor. Who Jorge Glas is and what he is charged with and how, well, I guess I'm editorializing here, but how weak the case is against him. I was hoping you could just talk a little bit about that to give people that context.
Sure. First, it wasn't an arrest because once the police agents cross the border and enter the Mexican embassy, it becomes an act of kidnapping, right? Because they don't have any legal authority to act on Mexican soil or Mexican jurisdiction. So one of the things that we're actually working on is a kidnapping case, a criminal case in Mexican courts to find Daniel Noboa, the president of Ecuador, responsible for kidnapping Glas from another country, from exerting unilateral and arbitrary force outside of Ecuador's jurisdiction. So that's an important concept that we have to deal with here. And Jorge Glas is important to mention his case. In the Americas, we have this system of human rights called the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. And since 2019, up to now, Jorge Glas has already received what are called provisional measures defending Jorge Glas from political persecution. So he has already been recognized as a political prisoner, as someone who has been persecuted politically ever since 2019. And now, when he, in December of last year, when he entered the Mexican embassy, he was a free man. Sure, there were some pending cases in the judicial system and the courts, but he was a free man when he entered the Mexican embassy, but he was still being persecuted by Ecuador's attorney general, completely aligned with the most conservative forces in the United States. And with the extreme and ultra right-wing forces of Ecuador. In December, when he entered the Mexican embassy, they wanted to arrest him, even though they didn't have an arrest warrant or a judicial order authorizing them to do so. So when he entered the Mexican embassy and when he requested political asylum, he was a free man. He did not have any arrest warrants or anything pending. However, after he entered the embassy, as has been happening in Ecuador for the last few years, the courts were stacked. They changed the justice system. They changed the administrative council of the justice system. They changed the National Supreme Court. And of course, in express decisions, they found Jorge Glas guilty and then justified the incursion, the invasion of Ecuadorian forces that removed their badges, that removed their name tags in order to enter the Mexican embassy. So these were more like thugs rather than police officers. They took Jorge Glas against his will, and he was kidnapped and is now against his will with arbitrary detention in the Ecuadorian prison.
Andres, I'm curious a couple of things here. First of all, when we talk about the lawfare that was used against Jorge Glas and at one point Rafael Correa as well, and the U.S. conservative, I guess, elements that role in this. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Because that was going on across Latin America in various ways with these sort of lawfare projects to unseat or to just get rid of progressive and left-leaning politicians and candidates. But moreover, now with the Biden administration in charge, what has been the U.S. response to this so far? So, like at this point, all I've seen is a few lukewarm statements that don't even really clarify, who's in the wrong and who's in the right. Just a general like Anthony Blinken statement of like everybody should respect international law, but nothing more than that. So I'm curious, is there any sort of U.S. hand here, whether it's the Biden administration or still those conservative elements in the U.S. that are backing the right in Ecuador? And can you, I guess, elaborate more on what happened in the past and why that's still so relevant when we're talking about this now?
So many Latin American progressive governments and the former officials of those progressive governments have been basically harassed by biased judicial systems, but with a key step prior to the judicial sentencing, which is that corporate media in these countries are becoming the judges of society, right? They frame the entire discussion with news headlines and with very powerful TV shows and with very strong media attacks in alliance with government and intelligence agencies. And then, with all the pressure and the media pressure, the courts decide, right, quote unquote. But this has been happening to Lula. This has been happening to Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner in Argentina. This happened to Rafael Correa in Ecuador. When I ran for president, Correa was my vice presidential candidate. And, the day before that, his candidate registration was in the Electoral Commission, he was sentenced in the fastest appeal at the Supreme Court in the history of the world. It only took 17 days for them to, read, process, and write, some several thousand pages. And so, of course, that was just political persecution. And this has been ongoing against the major leaders of the progressive forces in Ecuador. Now, there's definitely a U.S. hand in this. We've seen documents from the Department of Justice and Department of State where they say that they want to create these media platforms and the fake civil society organizations and media alliances to go after quote unquote corrupt officials. But that is just the excuse to go after progressive officials and progressive governments in the region. Famously in Ecuador, we have Diana Salazar, who was appointed there while Trump was the president, and she actually got an award from the Trump administration as an anti-corruption champion. And now there are important revelations certified by a Miami electronic forensics company that shows that she has been talking to the embassy of the United States throughout her tenure, and that the judicial measures have been, in fact, purposely designed to affect negatively the progressive forces of the citizens' revolution in Ecuador. So this is just starting. These revelations are just starting to come out, and it will be very important for the U.S. and Ecuador bilateral relationship. Now, more recently, with regards to the Jorge Glas case, the day after the raid, or 2 days after the raid, the Ecuadorian foreign minister called all the diplomatic ambassadors to go to the foreign ministry, and only one of them spoke. It was the U.S. ambassador. The rest of the ambassadors didn't even want to meet her because of the rejection of the violation of the embassy plans.
One of the things I think is important here is I know the current president in Ecuador is a banana plantation owner, and you look at the past several presidents that have had such a sort of seems like a strong effort to persecute the leaders of the citizens' revolution. What is it that they're so afraid of? Why is it that this movement, this citizens' revolution movement, is something that seems to be so odious to the right wing and many of the rich of Ecuador?
Well, the progressive movement in Ecuador, the Citizen Revolution, was the one that transformed the Ecuadorian society. With 10 years governing, we changed our energy dependency. We diversified economic relations, specifically with the People's Republic of China. It allowed us to invest huge amounts of money in infrastructure. We tripled the tax revenues. We nationalized oil. We restructured and defaulted on our foreign debt. And so all these things, including granting asylum to Julian Assange and granting safe passage to Edward Snowden and kicking out a U.S. military base in Manta, well, as you can imagine, it won't go unpunished. So these are the geopolitical repercussions that our leaders are suffering, that we've been suffering as well. In the case of my election, I was persecuted by the Colombian prosecutor general, who actually came to Ecuador and said that I had supposedly drug money funded into my campaign. Of course, that ended up being just BS. But here we are again, another chapter of political persecution.
I'm also curious the importance of the Mexico angle here. I mean, this is not a small country. Mexico is a massive country. To have essentially invaded the Mexican embassy is just so insane. So I'm just curious, how, not that I think it's a good thing they invaded the Mexican embassy, but the fact that it like drew Mexico in this way, and now you have Mexico going to the International Court of Justice with a case against Ecuador. How important is the, I guess, inclusion of Mexico in this like horrific drama with Ecuador's lawfare, because it brings in one of the, this massive country with like 120 million people, has a huge economy, is very, very important, and is now going to the ICJ.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely important in attracting attention to the political persecution that we've been denouncing over the years, and that few spaces like yours at Breakthrough have allowed us to speak to the world. But yeah, definitely gives a little bit more attention to what's been happening in Ecuador. When we organized a press conference with Jorge Glas lawyers, we were able to show to the world that this is just the final chapter, the last chapter in what has been 7 or 8 years of political persecution, where the judges are changed every time that they want to sentence somebody that they don't like, usually a correísta, usually someone from the Citizens Revolution. So it definitely gets the attention. And Mexico has had a tradition of political asylum. They welcome political refugees on the left, on the right, and so on. And in this case, it's an attack on the Mexican policy of granting political asylum, mainly in the Americas, but also crucially in the Spanish Civil War, when many Spaniards entered Mexico and created many universities and colleges and so on. So this is definitely an important aspect of that. We feel supported by the Mexican people that have been very welcoming of political asylees and so on. And now we hope that this attention can help to restore the workings of our political and judicial system, so that we can have peace, so that Jorge Glas can be free, so that he can go safely to Mexico, and so that the people, the politicians, the people that are giving the struggle here in Ecuador from a progressive perspective can fight the fight without fearing that we're going to get imprisoned or killed, as has been happening over the last few years.
Mm-hmm. Andrés Arauz, former Ecuadorian presidential candidate and research fellow at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Thank you so much for joining us here again on the Freedom Side.
Thank you all.